This is a sport that is currently popular all over the world, called the elevator exercise, also known as Kegel exercise. It is named after the person who invented it. Kegel exercises are practiced in maternal and child health hospitals, postpartum recovery centers, and by those doing prenatal and postnatal Pilates, yoga, and even fitness training. Everyone is practicing it. The basic idea is that when you exhale, your elevator rises from the second floor to the third floor, then to the fourth floor, or you can go up and hold for a few seconds, then slowly control it and gradually come back down. That's right. First, let me tell you a conclusion. Kegel exercises are a very good form of exercise. Very good. But they are only suitable for a specific group of people. They are for those who go from not being able to feel their pelvic floor muscles to being able to sense them. In other words, Kegel exercises are only suitable for this stage. At present, they are the most convenient and the easiest for people to understand and perform worldwide. So it is indeed a great invention. However, if you keep doing this exercise all the time, you could actually damage what was originally a healthy pelvic floor muscle. Many people might not understand this, and hardly anyone dares to say it openly on stage, except for someone like me, who's a bit reckless and dares to say anything. Some people say, those experts are world-renowned, while you only have a bit of fame in China's fitness circle. I don't care about that. I'm not concerned with those things. I just speak the truth and focus on the facts, not on people's reputations. So why do I say this? Listen to my explanation coming up. Every day I share a lot of knowledge points with you. As long as you can learn just one knowledge point a day, you've already gained a lot. This particular point is something that people all over the world are teaching, but while some people benefit from it, others are actually harmed by it. The only difference is that those who are harmed don't realize it. They don't know the secret that this is what's causing their harm. Let me ask you, suppose you're the boss, the one in charge. Who are you? You are the brain. Everything our body does. Every action is a command issued by the brain. Let me put it this way. You are the brain. Each of our muscles is like a person, each playing a different role. Right now, standing on this podium, I am your teacher. But when I step off the stage, after class, many of the people below are actually my seniors or mentors. They are my best brothers, my family, my comrades in arms. If we go work out together, those are my colleagues. When I return home, I am a child in front of my parents. Our muscles are the same way. Our pelvic floor muscles have several important functions: supporting the internal organs, assisting with exhalation, and acting as sphincters, that is, controlling the stopping of urination and defecation. You can categorize all their functions into these three types. Additionally, they also help maintain the stability of the pelvis, among other things. Maintaining what? Maintaining the stability of the pelvic floor and pelvic region. These are not as important as the previous functions. So if you were to rank them, how would you do it? Which of these is the most important? Supporting the internal organs is the most important because all the organs in our thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity, and pelvic cavity are centripetal. They all move downward and gravity pulls everything down, so they all rely on the pelvic floor to hold them up. In other words, supporting the internal organs is its most important function. Then, the second most important, would it be breathing or sphincter control? Breathing is the third, and then sphincter control. What about the diaphragm? What is its primary function? Inhalation. The second, maintaining the stability of the thoracic cage, and the third, sphincter function. The diaphragm also has a sphincter function, so you'll notice that both of these important respiratory muscles have sphincter functions, and both have ducts passing through them. So here's the question, what about our brain? It's actually quite smart. Whenever it does anything, it weighs how much energy it needs to spend, how much effort it needs to contribute to accomplish the task. For example, I might be able to lift 500 kilograms at maximum strength, but right now I just need to pick up this stick. After I look at the stick, my brain will make an assessment. So how much does this stick weigh? Probably less than half a kilogram. At this point, do I need my brain to recruit enough neural power to lift 500 kilograms just to pick up this stick? No, that's unnecessary and would waste muscle strength. If I did that, I would use up a lot of energy. So when I pick up this stick, after assessing it and realizing it weighs less than half a kilogram, at most I'll use the strength needed to lift 1 kilogram. That's enough to pick it up, and that's all that's needed. This is what the brain does. Now, you're the boss, and you're in control of your pelvic floor muscles. So, let me ask you, should you have your pelvic floor muscles contract more muscle fibers and generate more force when supporting your internal organs, or when exhaling? It should definitely be when supporting your internal organs, because the organs are heavy. Why would I need to use so much force just to exhale? Do you understand what I mean? Our diaphragm actually moves up and down by 10 centimeters. So why is it that when we inhale, it only moves about 1.2 centimeters, yet we can fill our lungs with 500 milliliters of air? What is the remaining 8.8 centimeters for? The remaining 8.8 centimeters are for when I'm lying down and my range of motion increases, and also for when I'm at peak contraction, at my maximum effort. When my body is extremely unstable, or when I'm bearing a heavy load, I will contribute more strength. In other words, if you ask me to lift 2 jin, I will engage this much muscle. If you ask me to lift 20 jin, I will engage even more. If you ask me to lift 200 jin, I will engage a bit more, and for 200 kilograms, even more. If you ask me to lift 500 kilograms, I will mobilize every muscle I possibly can. This is what the brain does. It decides, based on its assessment and experience, how much muscle to engage. Now, your internal organs are this heavy. With so many internal organs, plus when you run or jump, boom, when you land, there's an acceleration. Then in all the Kegel exercises you do, it's inhale as the elevator goes down, exhale as the elevator goes up. What function of the pelvic floor muscles are you actually training? When exhaling, let's say the pelvic floor muscles have a total strength of 100 Jin, but when I exhale, I only need to use 10 Jin of force. You can see this from the descent and ascent of the diaphragm. The range of movement is 10 centimeters, but my breathing only uses 1.2 centimeters. In other words, I only need to use 10% of the muscle's maximum strength for breathing. So, if you just sit there practicing breathing, no matter how much you practice, even for a lifetime, you will never be able to exert the diaphragm's maximum strength during the process of breathing because its maximum strength is never meant for breathing. It's meant to support, to stabilize the ribcage, and to help you bear weight. Our pelvic floor muscles are exactly the same. I have a total strength of 100 Jin, but since your internal organs weigh less than 100 Jin, when I breathe, I only need to use 10 Jin of strength, and I can contract and lift the pelvic floor muscles upward. So no matter how you practice exhaling and forcefully lifting your anus, even if you try your best to lift it as close as possible to bai hui, it's useless. That's because your brain knows you're breathing, and when you breathe, the total strength it gives you is only 10 Jin. So even if you practice Kegel exercises every day, you still won't be able to support such heavy internal organs because supporting the internal organs is never done with the strength used for breathing. There is a specific strength dedicated to supporting the internal organs. Just because this muscle is doing the work, and when I exhale I use all my strength, you might think that this muscle is exerting its full power. But that's not the case. That's not how you should look at things. When I used to give lectures on stage, I would say that I lift weights, and I also make simple nutritious meals for myself. I spend 10 hours a day exercising, doing rehabilitation, lifting weights, and working out. I only spend 1 hour a day cooking for myself. What you see is just that 1 hour, but you can't label me and say I'm a chef just because I can cook. I'm actually a sports rehabilitation coach. I spend most of my time doing that, so you shouldn't just label Kegel exercises for the pelvic floor as being only about exhalation, or say their function is exhalation. Exhalation is only a secondary function. The main function is to support the internal organs, because we've evolved from being on all fours to standing upright. That's the real reason. So when I say, why would you practice exhaling and contracting the pelvic floor while standing, or while walking? If you do exhalation and pelvic floor contractions while walking, you could actually damage a perfectly healthy pelvic floor, because when we walk, its main job is to support the internal organs. It normally uses about 20 Jin of force automatically, but if you insist on making it contract the pelvic floor as hard as possible while walking and exhaling, it only uses 10 Jin of force. So at this point, you end up confusing its natural function. When it's supposed to be supporting the internal organs, should it use more force to hold them up? Or should it focus on exhaling and contracting the pelvic floor? But then, the instructor forces you to do it this way, and you give yourself the command that you must contract the pelvic floor regardless of the internal organs. Just contract the pelvic floor now. So instead of using the original 20 Jin of force, now it only uses 10 Jin. Do you understand? So when you contract the pelvic floor while exhaling, it helps you find the sensation of your pelvic floor muscles. However, if this person, after practicing, just sits still, works in an office, or lies in bed without moving, then exhaling and contracting the pelvic floor already provides significant help. Because before, when exhaling, they couldn't feel the pelvic floor contraction at all, and had no control over their pelvic floor muscles. But after practicing Kegel exercises, they become able to control their pelvic floor muscles. But all that's improved is the strength of their exhalation. This is still far from being able to support the internal organs. If you originally had no control at all, and now you have a little, of course there will be some benefit. That's why people who used to have urinary incontinence or organ prolapse see some improvement after training their pelvic floor muscles. But if you keep practicing, the improvement won't continue indefinitely. Moreover, this person can't do intense exercise, can't run, and can't climb mountains. They can't play ball, can't lift weights, can't jump rope. Of course not. How could you possibly use the power of breathing to counteract the heavy impact of the internal organs? That's not what it's meant to do in the first place. So if you want to improve issues like urinary incontinence or the ability to support the internal organs, you have to train that specific function, not just keep strengthening the exhalation function. That's why I say, for those with severe organ prolapse, those who do a lot of physical activity, or those who engage in high-intensity exercise, practicing Kegel exercises is useless. You might even make things worse by doing them. Because if you were originally supporting your organs with 20 kilograms and now you're only using 10 kilograms, isn't that going to cause problems? The person who invented Kegel exercises for the pelvic floor didn't lift weights or do other activities. Instead, he focused on finding the quickest way to help you control your pelvic floor muscles. So this was a great discovery. But this doesn't mean it can fully support your internal organs, nor does it completely solve the problem of urinary leakage. This is just the beginning. You've only found the sensation of contracting your pelvic floor muscles. Later, when you add this sensation and try to maintain stability, there's another issue. When a muscle is working, it's hard for it to do two things well at the same time. What does that mean? It's like if I'm really good at lifting weights and I'm also good at preparing nutritious meals. But you can't expect me to prepare a great nutritious meal while lifting weights at the same time. And you also can't expect me to lift weights really well while cooking unless you're just being argumentative and say, why can't you cook and work out at the same time? Just put the dumbbells in the pan and stir fry them. That's just nonsense. It's the same with our pelvic floor muscles. They can either exhale or support the internal organs. You can't expect them to exhale and support the organs at the same time. Let me tell you when the pelvic floor muscles actually perform the exhalation function, only when they don't need to support the internal organs. When is that? When you're lying down, the weight of your internal organs is pressing toward your spine, right? Isn't it pressing toward the spine and not toward the pelvic floor muscles when you're lying down? In that position, your pelvic floor muscles don't need to support the internal organs. So at this time, it's easier for the pelvic floor muscles to contract during exhalation, and when they do, the upward movement is even greater. But as soon as you go from lying down to standing up or sitting up, especially when you're running or playing basketball, let me tell you responsibly, when you're running or jumping, the smaller your contact area, the more you need single leg support, the more unstable you are, and the greater the impact force. The pelvic floor muscles' ability to contract during exhalation is zero. At this moment, their main responsibility returns to their most important job, which is to support the internal organs. They have to prevent the internal organs from being pushed downward and falling out due to the strong impact. So at this time, they have no ability to contract during exhalation. Don't expect them to prepare a nutritious meal while you're lifting weights, okay? So at this point, do you realize how foolish it is to do those exercises where you contract your pelvic floor while exhaling? Because you're actually ruining its proper function. When you're walking, the pelvic floor isn't supposed to be involved in exhalation at all. It's your abdominal muscles and diaphragm that handle breathing when you walk. The pelvic floor has nothing to do with it. It's busy doing its main job. That's why I've specifically taken on many difficult cases of organ prolapse that couldn't be resolved in major hospitals. Do you know what advice hospitals usually give? For severe organ prolapse, running and jumping are not allowed, right? You're told not to do such intense exercises, but let me tell you, the less you do them, the more likely you are to experience prolapse. That's because their Kegel exercises aren't done properly, so they just make a blanket statement. Look, you've been practicing for so long without improvement, so they say you need surgery. But that's not the case. It's because you don't know how to train correctly, and you've actually damaged its proper function through your training. There's not a single teacher in the world who explains it to you like this. They always tell you to contract your pelvic floor while exhaling and to train your pelvic floor muscles. But you're different from us. You look at someone's reputation and think this is the latest global technique, so you keep following it. But as I practiced it myself, I found it was ineffective. I don't think I'm so stupid that I couldn't learn this, so I started looking for the reason. Why wasn't it effective? I realized that the teacher's thinking was too one-sided. They only approached it from a single perspective to help you find the sensation of the pelvic floor muscles. But that sensation alone can't support your internal organs. Because he deals with patients while I deal with people in the gym, so the groups we face are different. That's why when I used his method with people in the gym, it didn't work. So I kept searching for answers and tried it out with my clients myself. I finally found the answer. The reason it didn't work is that you're asking someone to lift weights while they're cooking, or asking them to cook while they're lifting weights. You're making them exert force without knowing how to do it properly. In other words, you're forcing them to exhale and contract their pelvic floor while they're supposed to be supporting their internal organs. They can only listen to you because you're forcing them to do it, so you end up damaging a perfectly healthy pelvic floor. Once you understand this principle, many of the people you previously harmed, many members who developed hemorrhoids or urinary leakage from your training, you can immediately go back and help them fix it. Sometimes you can even improve it in just one session and solve the problem right away, because you've understood the underlying logic. That's why I say that all over the world, when people do Kegel exercises, if you keep having someone with severe urinary incontinence or prolapse continue practicing, it's wrong. It's not just that at first they can't find the sensation. Once they've found it, if you still keep leading them to do this kind of exercise, that's a mistake. And it's a big mistake because you're using their exhalation force to support their internal organs.